Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 15 of the Kasten Kickstart, or Kickstarting Kasten, whatever flavor you prefer. Today, I want to talk about blueprints. And blueprints are a very important component of Kasten and Canister, may I add, data protection. And I'll get to that in a second. So, why am I especially excited about this? And I'm never excited about anything. You know that. I think that excited is overly used. Every time I go on the LinkedIn, everyone's excited. I can't believe that 24/7 you're excited. But I am excited about this because Kasten have announced in 8.5, which should be coming out soon, that they will have blueprints for AI. So, great. What's a blueprint? It's what an architect has. They're building a building. In a way, yes. This goes back to what we call in data protection application aware, or in better, simpler terms, preparing your workloads or applications to be properly backed up. So it's not enough to just back things up, okay? Applications are, I don't call them living entities, although with AI, maybe they will become that way, but they are functioning pieces of software that are doing things like databases. And to be able to properly back them up, you have to have those applications in a state where they will be backed up, and then you can recover to that state so the application will be functioning. So easiest way to talk about this, or a good example about this, is what I used to talk when I was explaining to customers about VSS in Windows. VSS, checkpoints or snapshots, what are they doing to your application? Well, it's like you've got one of those family reunions, and there's like it depends on the size of your family, but let's say like 50 people, and they're all moving. You're trying to take a photo of them. And you got to tell them to freeze or stop, because if they don't, everything's going to be blurry, right? Very similar of applications. If your application is got a lot of RAM or is doing all sorts of transactions, you back it up or you snapshot it, it's great. But then when you go to restore it, it could be corrupted because you got it when pieces were missing, whatnot. So every application, this is very application centric, by the way, too, has a method to prepare it for backups. Now in Windows, Microsoft created VSS, which is a plugin, which is fantastic, because what application developers could do would be to create a VSS writer specifically for their application that Windows could leverage to prepare for backup. So you have VSS for SQL, you have VSS for, I think, for Oracle. And so that took a lot of the problems out, because you would just turn on VSS. There's a VSS writer there. As long as the writers are okay, you get your application aware backup. But there were other applications like QuickBooks. I remember it was one I always had fun with, which VSS didn't work. Now, QuickBooks was a smaller application, so maybe we have problems. But if you're going to do it correctly, what you would do is look at the documentation, the application documentation, and there should be a section on there on how to properly back up the application. More often than not, you would find something would be a dump procedure. In other words, if it was a database, it would dump the contents of the database into a file. And you know that file, the data in there is fine. So if you restore the virtual machine or whatever, it could be a real machine, a hardware machine, then you could apply this dump into your application. It would be working again. So that is what you want to do. The same thing exists, obviously, for applications in Kubernetes deployments. KubeVirt as well. Now, we saw that freeze, enable freeze. Okay, that's part of it. But if you have applications in there, then you have to go to the next level and do scripts and whatnot. So same thing here with our example that we created the other day, MongoDB. It's a database. So to properly back it up, we want to use what Kasten call blueprints. And these were originally created in Canister, which I think Veeam owns. It's open source. But blueprints specifically address this problem. So let's take a look at this. Now, I'm going to warn you right away. It's not, to me at least, it wasn't very straightforward at first. It's getting better, but it's still one of those learning curves when it comes to Kasten application aware. Because in Linux or in Windows, it was as simple as enabling VSS. Other things, you create a script, or in Linux a script, or in Veeam jobs, you had the pre-script, the post-script, and whatnot. This is similar, but it gets a little bit trickier with some of these blueprints. Now, I have the blueprint, right? So what did I do? Kasten used to have in documentation some examples. Now, I looked, I couldn't find them. They might have taken them out because, of course, you can't really cookie cut this, right? Because every application is different, and your application might be different. Nevertheless, this is something that you can leverage AI pretty well for, with some trials and errors on a test environment. And that's what I did here because I couldn't remember off the top of my head, and I'll show you why. So this is a blueprint. It's a MongoDB blueprint. Let's just press this Edit MongoDB blueprint, and there you go. I mean, it's not super complicated, but if you're not a Mongo person or an MySQL person or whatever, or you're not an expert, and you don't do this every day, it might be a little daunting. So I told AI what I wanted to do. I showed it the Kasten documentation, the canister documentation, and it came back. And it took a few times. It messed up, don't worry. And I even caught it once, which made me very happy. But nevertheless, in the end, it was a lot faster creating this. And this is what it created, and this worked. So here it is. This is the blueprint, kind blueprint. So it's a specific type of thing in Kubernetes. Well, it's a custom resource that's been added. That's not, a blueprint's not in Kubernetes by default. We remember that's something that you have to add in. And the name, Mongo Blueprint, everything else here is pretty self-explanatory. The interesting things here are the actions, okay? And you see there's a function called kube exec. Well, exec is we saw that in Linux. So execute something. And then the name lock Mongo, well, that tells me what it's going to do. It's going to lock the database so that nothing can be happening when it's taking its snapshot. And here, if you go further down, it's just all those commands. So that's fine. And then there's how to unlock it and whatnot. So you can try this yourself, or you can create it with AI. In fact, you put it in there, you press validate and save. And if it sees something horribly wrong, it won't let it go forward. So that saves you a lot of time. Okay, we have a blueprint. We've got a backup. We've got a policy. Now what do we do? So this is the part that becomes kind of tricky-ish in my view. What is the blueprint going to work on? Okay, in our case, our application, it's a stateful set. That's where the data is. It might have been deployment, but in our case, it's a stateful set. So that's what we want to work on. So we need to connect it to our deployment, our stateful set, our MongoDB application. Because right now it's the deployment. It's a blueprint. Nobody knows about it, and Kasten doesn't know what to do with it. So they have things called bindings. And you can create bindings is one way you can do it. There's basically two ways. So this way, you create a binding, and for instance, very straightforward, you enable it here, you go next, and then you put the constraints in, and I'll just show you what that means. So it has to connect up. How does it know what to connect to? Okay, so I say, using an operator in group apps, version v1, and that's what stateful, the resource stateful sets are. So stateful sets, that's all it's saying is, look, stateful sets. I could put the name of the stateful set in there too if I really want to be precise, but I'm not going to be. I want you to connect it to those, but I also want you to connect it, and with another constraint, to the MongoDB, so in the namespace MongoDB, because otherwise it's going to go all over your Kubernetes cluster looking for these stateful sets, which you don't want it to do in this case. And that should be enough, okay? And then you get a summary, and then you send it in. Okay, all right? Now, there's another way you can do this too. If you go to Applications, and you press on the MongoDB namespace, and you can go to here, and Stateful Sets, Configure Blueprints, okay? And there it is. So I already did that, as you can see. So I create the binding, and then, actually, you can see it right here. Look, MongoDB, right? And I actually think you need the binding too. So this was confusing in documentation. I'm going to experiment with this a bit. I think I tried it just with this, and it says there's no binding. So you have to have a binding. But in the documentation, and again, I'll have to reread it again, but it seemed to tell me that, well, you can do it this way or that way, but it needed both. So just keep that in mind. You can view the blueprint. There's the blueprint, okay? And when you set it, you configure the blueprint. So you get a drop down. Now there's none there now because I've already got it, right? So it's in use. So that one's in use. Status is in use, and it's MongoDB. That's the name of it. Okay. So let's cancel that because it's all set up. And then what's going to happen? The backup's going to run, and we'll have more than one session on this blueprints because it has changed since it originally came out, and it is one of those things that everyone I've talked to, including myself, if I don't do this for a while, I kind of forget a bit, is more challenging. But what's going to happen? What's going to be the difference? When you run the backup, what you're going to see is in the backup phase, okay, you're going to see some new things. We can run down here to what's happening, and you should see somewhere in here, boom, type blueprint binding, MongoDB. blueprint, okay? That means it's leveraging those things, okay? So these are the artifacts, the specs, right? And then the phases, and it completed successfully. So that, in a sense, well, not a sense, in essence, is an application aware backup. So there you go. Don't worry when I come back to this. We might come back to this in part 16 again, because this is one of these things that again and again and again people ask questions about, and it has changed over time. But this was just dipping our toe in the water, right? Tomorrow we're going to dip the foot in, maybe, or jump in totally. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.